I believe it's to you, Daniel, correct?
I think it's actually to me, maybe. I could be wrong.
No, I think
we can go in. We can go in whatever you want, Tom. Or Mark, I'm happy to do whatever.
Okay. Daniel.
Yes, sir.
Several tragic mass shootings over the last decade or so have predictably reinvigorated the Second Amendment debate across our nation. The renewed debate has led to a multitude of new gun laws being passed and implemented. However, it appears many of these new gun laws will effectively restrict the rights of peaceful, law-abiding citizens, while predictably having little, if any, deterrent effect on the persons actually committing the gun violence. The question is, what federal level steps, if any, will you take to curb gun violence in our communities while not hindering the ability of lawful citizens to provide for their own personal defense by the deliberate exercise of their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms?
Yeah, there's a couple of threads that sort of come together with all these mass shootings. Number one is many of them, or most of them, are actually, they're not the sort of ones where somebody walks into a school. In fact, they're typically gang-on-gang violence where somebody drives by a block party or something. And Tom has been pretty good about this. He talks about the 17 most dangerous blocks and the 17 most dangerous cities, sort of, and I'm sure he'll hit this again. But the fact is, most of that violence is gang-on-gang. So when you see these large shooting incidents, it's typically gang-on-gang. The things we need to do as a federal level, number one is we need to enforce the gun laws we have now. We have plenty of federal gun laws, and the Democrats have been really silly about this. They fight against things like mandatory minimums for violent criminals. I'm for mandatory minimums for violent criminals. I'm against them for things like drug offenses, but I'm for them for violent criminals. And so that's number one. We need to enforce the gun laws we have now. Number two, though, another common thread with all these shootings, and it's one of two typically. We saw in California a few years ago, and then at Pulse, both of those were terrorist nightclub shootings or terrorist shootings, which were related to lone wolf type terrorist activity. And that's one kind of approach or one kind of problem. But the rest of them they all go back to the same kind of root cause, which is broken families, where young men don't have the guidance they need when they're little kids to grow up and understand what the right and wrong times to use physical force are, where they don't know that there are safety nets around them, where they're not given the education and the love they need at a young level. So fundamentally, a lot of these are about broken families. And so we need to promote pro-family policies, enforce the gun laws we have now, and then, of course, our law enforcement and everybody needs to be alert to terrorist threats like what we saw in California with the husband and wife team, and like what we saw at Pulse, which was ultimately a anti-gay Muslim terrorist who did that.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Tom?
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. Yeah, the 17 cities problem is actually gang-on-gang violence. I don't think those fall under mass shootings. The ones that we most commonly experience in the United States are very often they are a mental health problem. But our mental health services in the United States have so atrophied at this point that we have 1.4 million attempted suicides every year. 1.4 million attempted suicides. About 54% of those, not the vast majority, but a majority of suicides are actually white men over the age of 50. We have a mental health crisis in the country. Please, everybody, I recommend everybody read Why Meadow Died. Why Meadow Died is a perfect example of someone who had been homicidal from a very young age due to mental illness, and they were prevented from getting mental health care, adequate mental health care. All right, the bureaucracy prevented the young man in Parkland from getting mental health care. The same thing happened in Sandy Hook, exact same situation. These are mental health issues that are well known, well in advance, but there's no mental health services out there. So if we promote mental health services in our country, we are going to tamp down not on just mass shootings, and we're going to capture more mass shooting before they happen. We're also going to go after the suicide problem. To a great extent, I think those same mental health services are going to affect people that are in the opioid crisis, because a lot of the opioid deaths are also believed to be suicides. Most suicides occur within a crisis moment, within about 2 weeks of a relationship breakup, a financial problem, or some sort of criminal problem. All right. So the mass shootings are a mental health problem, but to fix that, we're going to have better access to mental health care. That's why red flag laws are so bad, because they prevent people from getting help. That is why we have to fix our mental health problem, and it will help with regard to the mass shooting problem. The gun violence problem in the 17 major inner cities is a totally different problem. It's economics, it's Democrats, because every one of those 17 major cities has been run by Democrats for 50 years, and they have a lot more problems than just gang-on-gang violence. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you, Tom. Elisa?
So first of all, we need to acknowledge that anytime there's a loss of life, the public has every right to have an emotional response and to mourn the loss of life. And mass shootings are no exception to that. In fact, it adds to the grief that people experience because of the senselessness of that tragedy in almost every situation. Unfortunately, a lot of the gun debate is linked to the mass shootings, where people did not have the opportunity to defend themselves in most cases. Many of those shootings take place in schools. I'm a teacher, and I can tell you, I keep a stack of canned goods, green beans, in my classroom. I have a stuffed green bean for a lesson on economics, and then canned green beans that my students know from day one as part of our safety procedures. This is our arsenal. These are the tools with which we get to arm ourselves and serpentine the heck up out of here if an armed aggressor comes into our building. And that's unfortunate. The federal government response to curb gun violence actually needs to be educating people on firearms safety. I think that everyone should have a healthy respect for firearms and not fear a tool in someone's hands, and then removing the obstacles of the gun-free zones, which create soft targets out of individuals who would otherwise be able to defend themselves. Other appropriate federal government interventions would be grant funding for more counselors in schools to reach people early on, especially those most at risk for their mental health because of the breakdown of our family structure and people who are agitated and unable to articulate their feelings. But we need to have a proper response, not an emotional one, when we're talking about our federal government legislating interventions. And then I also think that repealing the gun-free zones altogether would be a necessary step towards restoring our rights as law-abiding citizens, because here's the bottom line: criminals don't follow the law. That's the very definition of criminal. And so we need to make sure that law-abiding citizens can do our part to step up when faced with a threat.
I'm in violent agreement with Lisa Baldwin. I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for hitting on that. I didn't get time for that.
I appreciate your vote on June 23rd, Tom.
Well played, Elisa. We'll all trade votes. That'll be perfect. Have to have an accountability mechanism, though.
Just to let you all know where we currently are, we have 2 more